The 1916 Irish Uprising. On the eve of World War I, Ireland, which had been absorbed into the United Kingdom around a century earlier, was on the verge of winning limited self-government, or Home Rule. Although Ireland had political representation in the British Parliament, it lacked its own government, which resulted in poverty, depopulation, and economic exploitation. As a result, nationalism had grown steadily throughout the 1800s, with the Home Rule movement becoming dominant within Irish politics. Since the 1870s, the Irish Parliamentary Party had pursued this agenda, which would allow Ireland a degree of independence in its domestic affairs while still keeping the country within the United Kingdom. The party, led by John Redmond, finally succeeded in getting a Home Rule bill passed in the British Parliament in 1914. There was to be no straightforward route to Home Rule, however. Ireland was divided along religious and political lines, with the South dominated by Catholics who tended to embrace nationalism to some degree, and the North by Protestants who felt more strongly tied to Britain politically and were resolved to remain under the jurisdiction of the British Parliament. In the South, a group known as the Irish Republican Brotherhood (IRB) found Home Rule to be insufficient because it did not offer true sovereignty. The IRB was so intent on achieving total independence for Ireland that it took up arms, yet it by no means represented mainstream views, even in the South. This became clear with Britain's involvement in World War I in August 1914. The IRB opposed Ireland's participation in the war, but the Irish Parliamentary Party supported it, accepting that the enactment of Home Rule would have to be postponed. The majority of the Irish public agreed, supporting the war in the same way as other UK nationals. As Britain focused its military resources on fighting abroad, the IRB leadership believed that fewer soldiers would be available for security purposes in Ireland. So, on April 24, 1916, with Britain's attention diverted by its preparations for a large-scale military offensive near the Somme River in France, the IRB decided the time was ripe for action. Led by a military council that had been formed within the organization, it rose up in armed rebellion against British rule and proclaimed the formation of a republic. Around 1,500 people, IRB members along with members of other nationalist groups, occupied various sites throughout Dublin, Ireland's capital. They had hoped their actions would inspire a wider uprising among the general population, but this did not occur. Moreover, lack of manpower meant they could not capture major railway stations and docks, or, most importantly, Dublin Castle, the British government's administrative headquarters. Consequently, Britain was able to move soldiers into the city unimpeded and retain control of its administrative centre, which proved key. Thus, despite being initially caught off guard, the British quickly gained the upper hand through a swiftly organised counterattack. British troops flooded into the city, and heavy artillery was employed, leading to fire damage and civilian casualties. Although they fought valiantly, the rebels were vastly outmanned and outgunned. They were forced back into a defensive position, and it was only a matter of time before they surrendered. The uprising ended on April 29, leaving approximately 450 dead and 2,000 injured, with much of the centre of Dublin destroyed. British retaliation was prompt and harsh. Thousands of people suspected of involvement in the rebellion were rounded up and the leaders were tried and convicted by military courts. 15 of the rebels were executed by firing squad following trials that were conducted in secret and without defense attorneys, which British officials later ruled to have been in violation of established military judicial procedures. Given that the rebels had struck during wartime, a military response including conducting the trials in military courts rather than civilian ones was considered by some at the time to be justifiable. However, officials in the British government quickly became concerned about the manner in which the British commanding officer in Ireland was dealing with the rebels and the reaction this might provoke. While further executions were halted, public opinion against British rule was galvanized as a result of the executions of men whom many Irish people regarded as patriots. The uprising had indirectly become a catalyst for a change in public sentiment. The Home Rule movement lost steam, and there emerged in its place widespread acceptance of the rhetoric of a political party called Sinn Féin, allowing the party to dominate the 1918 UK elections in Ireland. The party refused to take up its seats in the British Parliament and declared independence, which escalated into a guerrilla conflict that culminated in a large part of Ireland achieving the sovereignty the IRB had originally sought. Honoured by statues and commemorated annually, the 1916 uprising is now regarded as a central event in Irish history.